Okay, welcome everyone. So today we have Matt Cable here, Community Development Division Manager with Buncombe County. And he's here to talk about Buncombe County's efforts in the affordable housing space. So without further ado, Matt Cable, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you all for having me today to provide information for the group here and also those joining via Zoom on affordable housing efforts that the county is undertaking. So I am Matt Cable. I am the Community Development Division Manager. I've been with the county now for 6 years. And within the Community Development Division, we do a number of things and take on a number of different types of work. A leading charge is affordable housing efforts. We also work in public transportation and overseeing Mountain Mobility, the rural transit system that we operate. And recently, we have added homelessness support within our division. So just a little bit of an overview of what's in this presentation. It's a lot of information. Okay, great. So it's a lot of information. You all can read through it. We'll touch on all of these points, but really it's kind of to assess or provide information on the background, where we are in terms of funding activities, and then kind of newer projects that we're undertaking. So the first piece that I always like to start with is the assessment of need. So what is the need for affordable housing in Buncombe County? There's a lot of information about the fact that we don't have enough affordable housing in the county, but we like to base our discussion on the studies that we fund within the region. And those include the housing needs assessment conducted in 2020. So that seems like a long time ago. We do these about every 5 years. So we'll be kicking off that process next calendar year so that we have one completed in 2025. But basically, this is a report that we seek consultant support to do and perform in order to analyze the market characteristics within Buncombe County, particularly with a focus on affordability and households earning less than 80% of AMI, which I'll talk about a little bit more, as well as even market rates. We kind of look at the full spectrum of market conditions. What does affordable mean? So affordable means a lot of different things. The basic definition is that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on your housing costs. So that's rent, mortgage, utilities, anything that it costs you to stay in a space. So that's a really broad category. And I like to say, what's affordable to someone making $20,000 should be 30% of their income. If you make $200,000, it should still be 30% of your income. So that's kind of what affordability should be. We focus our efforts on households that make less than 80% of the area median income. So those are people who generally have less access to housing based on the costs. And for those people, many of them are spending more than 30% or even more than 50% of their income just on their housing costs. So they are considered to be cost burdened or severely cost burdened. I don't have to, particularly with this room, go into a lot of detail here. We know rents are rising, they're high and they're rising. Again, this data is set back to 2020, but we've only seen increased escalation of rents in our multifamily projects. And then sales prices, again, you're all very familiar. They're just rising and continuing to rise. Not a surprise to anyone in the room. So there are gap estimates that are provided through the housing needs assessment studies. Again, the one that we reference the most is the 2020 study, because that's one that Buncombe County was directly partaking in. There was a housing needs assessment conducted for the entire 18-county Western North Carolina region. Dogwood Health Trust undertook that effort. So we also reference those numbers. I have them up here. And after this, I'm happy to share this presentation, any information in it as well. But you can see, again, escalation, how many rental units were needed. In the 2020 assessment, we were behind about 3,000 units. In the 2021 assessment, Buncombe County needed almost 5,000. So we expect that is a continued gap that is growing. And it's very similar across most categories, either holding or having an increased need for affordability. So looking at our history, talking about where we are today, it's important to kind of understand how Buncombe County has worked in the space of affordable housing over the last almost 2 decades. So the board in 2004 established the first, the Housing Trust Fund is what they called it at that point. But it was really a mechanism for the county to identify funds to spend on affordable housing work. In 2004, there was the creation of an initial policy and a designation of about $300,000 to support affordable housing activities within the county. That investment level held. The policy changed over time through the course of the next 15 years or so until 2017, when the Board of Commissioners had a real renewed interest in affordable housing and seeking to expand that activity and that work. So after some strategic planning exercises at the board level in 2019, the board created an affordable housing committee. They appointed commissioners to serve in that committee. They created a new process for reviewing proposals for projects. They had the first meetings of the committee, so that kind of public level of elevation, and then established an actual division within the county to work on affordable housing efforts. The current Affordable Housing Committee, so this is the committee that reviews project proposals and makes recommendations to the full board on projects that it recommends and believes should be funded using county funds. That is comprised of Brownie Newman, the chairman, as well as Commissioners Edwards and Sloan. Along the same time, about 2019, the Community Development Division was established. That included one division manager and then 2 staff, one focused solely on transportation, the other focused on housing, the manager working in both of those spaces. Beginning about 1.5 years ago, there was a recognition that with the increased amount of investments that were being anticipated, the existing volume of projects we were managing, and the goals that we were moving towards, that there needed to be increased staffing. So you can see in this slide, this is our existing staff. There are a number of folks working on affordable housing efforts. So these are just those focused on the affordable housing activities. We have a couple of additional staff that work solely in transportation. Each person has kind of defined projects and roles. And if you go to our website, which I hope to have time to show you before I wrap up today, you'll see kind of who's working in which areas as well. Also on this slide, though not in our division, is the new Affordable Housing Bond Manager. So I'm sure you've all heard of in the news about the Affordable Housing Bond, perhaps voted during the referendum period. And that staff person is Chloe Donahoe. So she just joined us earlier in June, and she works adjacent to us and kind of parallel with our activities, since she has a focused source of funding for that project. Just talking about a general increase in investment. So these are general fund dollars, meaning property tax dollars that are generated by the county. As I mentioned, from 2004 until 2019, roughly $300,000 was committed each year. Beginning in 2020, that investment jumped to $2.2 million and now is sitting at $2.3 million. So the board on June 20th just approved the next fiscal year 24 operating budget, which will include another $2.3 million in general funds to support the work. I like to show this slide because, again, the county's been undertaking this work since 2004. At this point, given the allocations that were just recently approved, so it does reflect 2024 anticipated expenses and activities, the county's invested $38.4 million, which supports almost 4,500 households or creates units. So I put that there as a caveat. Certain activities that we fund are to assist households. Certain activities are to actually construct units. Looking at this slide, you'll notice again, the county's investing 2.3 million. Sometimes projects don't advance. That money continues to be reinvested. But within each year, the projects that have been fully delivered or received are reflected in this slide. In 2024, due to some delays in projects from 2023, and with bond funds being available, the county has committed almost $17 million to projects that will produce an anticipated 565 new rental units, as well as support 295 households through emergency repair and other activities. So the 38.4 million is a large number. Part of why we also show the last several years is because a significant amount of that investment has been in a very recent window, given that $300,000 commitment up until 2019. So affordable housing goals. The Affordable Housing Committee worked for about 1.5 years, reviewing kind of existing conditions, looking at that housing needs assessment report, and identifying areas where they felt it was important to establish goals for the county to be moving towards. So if we're allocating resources and funding, then we should have a target that we're trying to meet. So through that effort, they advanced a number of goals and objectives to the full board, and the board did adopt those goals and objectives last year. These include increasing the supply of affordable housing for rent, affordable housing for home ownership, especially for BIPOC households, preserving the supply of naturally occurring affordable housing, supporting activities that achieve functional zero homelessness, and supporting activities that encourage the use of all vouchers. So there is, if you haven't heard, constant kind of discussion around voucher usage and vouchers that are being underutilized at this point. So beyond those broad goals, they did establish specific objectives. And so this gets to, what is the number of something that we're going to produce? The goal by 2030, so we have basically 6.5 years to kind of get to these benchmarks, is to produce over 1,800 rental units, 400 ownership units, 500 repair units, and then 400 ownership or rental units for households in the middle income. So again, the real focus is on housing affordability, those people who make less than 80% of area median income, but there is an emphasis on producing units for households that make around the median income. So somewhere between 80 and 120% of the average income. Yes.
You want to hold questions to the end?
We can do questions now. We can do it at the end. It's whatever.
Totally up to you.
Yeah.
If you don't mind for the Zoom people, maybe just briefly restate the question just so they can hear before you answer it.
Sure.
Yeah, so that 831.50 affordable housing is by 2030. Why is that number different than the project number on the previous slide?
Sure. So the question is about the difference in project deliverables versus from the goal. So, and I just want to make sure you're referencing this slide.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So these are kind of the comprehensive number of units that have been impacted over the course of a 20-year window. What the board and committee are hoping is that between the adoption of the goal period, which started in 2022 until 2030, that this will be that impact. So it will be rolled into like that comprehensive total system impact. But that's really like we had a start point and then by 2030 kind of window to make this deliverable. So how do we actually get the funds out? The county has the Affordable Housing Services Program. That's the policy, that's the mechanism by which we make funds available to projects. We do an open call or an application window from December to February. During that time, we have a pre-application conference. The committee reviews applications in the spring, and then the Board of Commissioners actually approves the project allocations and the recipients of funding awards, typically in June, so that funding can be available as early as July 1 for projects that are prepared to advance. This slide has a lot on it, but these are really the activities that the county can fund through the program. So those include construction of new housing, be that single family or multifamily, be that for rental or ownership, provided that that housing is available to households earning less than 80% of area median income. We also support conversion of existing non-residential structures. So if you had a structure that you wanted to rehab for affordability, you certainly could.
60%, did you say, of affordable median income?
So the question was, what threshold of income? It's 80% or
80%.
less. Yes.
I thought I heard 60.
We also support down payment assistance for income eligible home buyers. So we do that through other nonprofits. So we don't directly provide down payment assistance to individuals, but nonprofit agencies are able to seek funding from us that they then deploy to income eligible households. Asheville Area Habitat has been a frequent recipient of down payment assistance funding. MHO has also been a recipient and active in that space.
You're good, just answer it. Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to make sure I wasn't missing any.
Yeah, those are the ones with which we engage. That doesn't mean that they're the only folks working in that space, but we have funded them or been a part of their programming over the course of the program. Tenant-based rental assistance. So we do support nonprofits that actually provide rental assistance. So that can be rental, utility assistance that are operating within the county. Question?
Yeah, what is the 80% of the median income, sort of like a thing?
Great question. The question was, what is 80% of area median income? So we reset that value every April. That's when HUD actually releases new values for us to utilize. So I don't like stating it right away, like we're still in that early phase where I'm trying to remember. And it varies based on household size. So a 4-person household AMI is different from a single person household AMI.
I think right now, a 2-person household is sitting at like 32,000.
Right. And last year, a 4-person was around 65,000. For kind of perspective and context. At the end, I can show you on the website where we keep that updated on our website so that at any point you can kind of be aware of where someone falls income-wise for accessing our programs. The last 3 are emergency repairs. So that's a space we've done a lot of work in. So homeowners who are income eligible but may have a failing system, septic, HVAC, roof, kind of those systems tend to need significant investment. So we make, again, available to nonprofit agencies that want to operate those programs, funding available for that. And then we have 2 other programs which are slightly different than the rest. The first is the New Start program. That allows a nonprofit entity to come in with like a new idea of how to engage around surrounding affordability. So it's really the onus is on that proposer to really explain how they're going to make an impact and start a new program that would be impactful to affordability. And then an administration program. So we did hear, this is the newest of the activities we support. We did hear from our nonprofit entities that they are struggling with administrative funds to continue to operate their programs. So we did make that available in the last round for folks to seek. And I always kind of end this one with, are there any other questions about the kind of activities that the funding supports?
So those activities that they support, it's still like the same application process. It's like accepting applications for any of those types of things, December, January, and approval in June.
So the question was for all the activities, is it the single application window? Yes. Yeah. So we open them all. It's a single application form that you complete through an online portal and attach various documents. But it's standardized. It's one kind of once a year, one point of entry to access the funds.
So when you have similar projects that are vying for the same funds, what are you looking for in an application that's really going to edge one out over another?
So the question was about projects and in terms of selecting, maybe 1 out of 2 or 3 similar projects. So we actually have a guide. So in addition to the application portal, there's a Affordable Housing Service Program guide that explains what we are looking for from a project, and it varies from category to category. If it's construction, we're looking for something very different than what you might want for an emergency repair application. But it will outline things like, for a construction project, deferring your developer fee or showing a willingness to do that might edge you out or rank you higher in terms of receiving funds than developers that weren't willing to do that. And not to get too far into that, but deferring developer fee means the developer still gets to collect their profit. It really is how they continue to pursue projects and move forward. They need the developer fee, but rather than getting it all up front when the project begins, they choose to defer it, meaning they collect it in the first few years of the project operating.
Is the breakdown on new construction versus conversion projects, like percentages? Because for example, over there actually behind Blackberry Barbecue, the Ramada Inn, does that fall under the Affordable Housing Committee's purview that they're doing,
Sure.
converting that old hotel?
So the question was about construction versus conversion, and what we've seen historically in terms of funding, and then also about the county's involvement with the Ramada conversion. So the first part of that, the county has largely been involved with new construction. We have done one rehabilitation project kind of over the course of the program. New construction, I will say new construction isn't easier, but funding sources are sometimes easier to obtain for new construction than rehab. They certainly have their avenues, and people tend to, that do rehabilitation and repurposing to affordable housing are very niche in that market, right? So they're doing that kind of consistently. If you're doing new construction, you're doing that consistently. The conversion of the Ramada Inn is not a project that we have been involved in terms of funding through the Affordable Housing Services Program. The other one that I'll mention is a conversion is Compass Point, the former Days Inn conversion for Homeward Bound. The county is supporting that, but through ARPA funds, so it didn't come through this program. But that would be an example of a recent activity where the county has been funding that work.
Other examples on what I guess the commissioners look at these projects and decide. Like we think of things like being close to transit lines as being a plus, or depth and length of affordability and stuff like that. Are all those things kind of taken into account when they're deciding?
So the question was, a little bit more about what evaluation that they're making in terms of differentiating projects from each other. Most projects that we fund are seeking other funds through the NCHFA. So when you think about the big apartment complexes, they're seeking low-income housing tax credits. Those projects minimally require a lot of things like access to transit as kind of a point. They did set benchmarks in the goals about, deeply affordable units. So they want to see, a certain number of units available for households earning less than 30% of AMI. So that's an area where if your project is delivering a lot of deeply affordable units, that might differentiate you from other projects. It is a competitive process in terms of determining. Also, the other big factor is what is your need, not necessarily what you ask for as an applicant, but what they determine to be your need in reviewing your financial documentation. So it certainly comes down to, and it's listed in the guide that you receive when you're applying. It comes down to a number of factors, and some of that is even availability of funds. So they wouldn't forego funding a project that needed $800,000 because they had $800,000 left, but the other project that needed $1 million really needed it. They had insufficient funds to support that one if they were equal. They're going to support the project that they can continue to advance. So I will say, thankfully, that's a decision that's made at the committee level, a recommendation that's made at the committee level, and decision is made at the board level on all of those fronts. Staff provides information and advisement.
Your nonprofit partners are Mountain Housing in Dogwood, or are there others?
Great question. So it depends on the activity. And the question was, who are the nonprofit partners? So we consistently have provided funding to Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity, to Mountain Housing Opportunities, Typically, they're working in emergency repair as well as construction, so we might be funding both of those. Elida Homes does TBRA work. The Arc of Buncombe County has received funds for TBRA. It's a number of providers, and I can show you on our website when we get to that point, kind of how you see who's doing what work and which ones we're funding and doing that.
And I'm sorry, one more question. So are private enterprise in competition with them for funds? Or do they partner with them for funds, or how does that work?
So the question's about like private enterprises and how they access the funds and whether they're competing with the nonprofits. So for-profit developers are typically engaging with us only in the construction side. We do limit most of their activities to nonprofits because that's the nature of the work that we're asking them to perform as kind of a nonprofit activity. And developers do need to receive some kind of profit. They're a business, right? So like a developer fee in a construction project is how they recoup their project work, their output. That's how they receive that. So yes, they are competing when they come in with a construction project. It is an interesting dynamic. So for-profit developers may in some ways be more competitive than nonprofits because of the number of properties they hold, how much funding they need to support the project. So it's a very interesting dynamic, but yes, they are competing for the same pool of funds. Great questions. The next thing that I'll mention are some external funds that we have received. So for the last several years, until actually the last year and a half or so, we've operated all of our affordable housing activities using local funds. We have made application in 2 instances and have been successful in obtaining funds from outside of the county to do this work. The first is the Community Development Block Grant Neighborhood Revitalization Funds. So we applied for $400,000 in funding from the State Department of Commerce. We were awarded those funds. The focus of those is home repair. We're actually in the middle right now of a request for proposal process to identify a partner that would actually go out and perform the repairs. And then we would reimburse those activities. We also have a $400,000 ARPA Fiscal Recovery Fund award. Again, this is focused on home repair activities. We have 2 $400,000 different awards, so $800,000 total impact. Through another request for proposal process, which was completed a couple of months ago, we identified, in this case, Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity and Mountain Housing Opportunities sought that funding to deliver that project. The affordable housing bond. So it's one slide because it's new, but as you're aware, Buncombe County residents approved the $40 million bond under referendum, and the board acted to move forward with that. This is being managed by the Affordable Housing Bond Program Manager. So that new position that I mentioned earlier, Chloe Donahoe, who started in June. So she's responsible for kind of overseeing the projects that will be funded with these dollars. I'll point out that right now, the way that you access bond funds is through the Affordable Housing Services Program. So you would come through that same application window, and the committee would make a recommendation whether you're being funded with bond funds or general fund dollars. So that's how you actually can access the bond funds at this point. There may be other strategies identified to actually provide access to that funding. So that's yet to be seen. In the first round of applications, almost 13 million was awarded, leaving about 27 million in bond funds available to fund other future projects.
How many units does that represent?
So it is a portion of the number I referenced earlier. I'm not going to say it right offhand, but it is a large portion. Three complexes or apartment developments are being funded with the bond funding. One is over 150 units. So it's a large portion of that activity. The affordable housing feasibility studies. There are a number of other projects that we're taking on at this point. The feasibility study, which you may have heard about in the news, is really an undertaking the county had for properties that it currently owns that the commissioners wanted to have evaluated to determine if they might be better purposed for affordable housing. So we contracted with a consultant, the UNC School of Government Development Finance Initiative. We're actually working with them on a couple of different fronts at this point, but they are the consultant that's leading this project. And what we did at the beginning was say, here are all the properties that the county owns. We're really interested in you looking at these properties in the downtown area that we think might be appropriate for affordable housing. They have access to things like transit and amenities that you would need. And it was a two-phase project. First, kind of saying, all right, here are all the properties, which ones do we think rise to the top? The board then selected which projects it wanted to move into the next phase. And that's really assessing what might best fit on the properties. So doing a lot of environmental assessment of properties, geotechnical work, architectural renderings. And the whole idea here is to get the project to an approval level so that a developer will know what they're getting into, right? So they'll know, they'll have environmental reports, they'll know what the geotech is looking like. They'll know potentially what kind of financing they need to put together to deliver the project. So it's really to ultimately get to development agreements. So for the county to, through DFI, find a developer and then make the transfer of property either as through ownership and sale or through ground leasing. So the three sites that they settled on and that we're pursuing that phase 2 activity work right now are along Cox Avenue, Valley Street, and then Irwin Hills. So if you hear anything about these in the news, generally the idea is to develop low-income housing tax credit projects. Again, that's a way by which the local commitment can be reduced, is that accessing some of those state level funds. So we're looking at kind of each site, hopefully developing over 400 units between the three collective projects. I will just mention, and then I'll take your question, that there are public processes that are kind of underway. So there's some initial public meetings. We're in the phase of identifying and working with an architect to do a little bit more detailed massing, particularly with new information from environmental reports and geotechnical study of the site to kind of make sure what size building can this hold. And then there'll be a second round of public input based on that. Question?
Yeah, I believe you mentioned this way back in the beginning, but I just want to verify that you said all of these units would be required to accept housing choice vouchers.
Great question. It's about the mentioning of vouchers earlier and whether projects are required to accept them. So we do not mandate voucher acceptance as part of our program. Low-income housing tax credit projects, which are the ones we principally also fund, do require that you're willing to accept vouchers. We haven't written that into our policy. By practice, every one we fund, we've made accept vouchers. It's just the standard, and that's in a rental capacity. There has been question about, well, are you going to mandate that they must accept vouchers this many in the project or other things? That can actually threaten project viability if you mandate, a certain number of units be preserved for voucher holders. In the event that we ran out of vouchers or vouchers weren't available, then they wouldn't be collecting enough rent to sustain the project. So,
Makes sense.
question?
Are all of these projects going to be simply affordable rental projects? Are any of them going to be homeownership opportunities? And if so, would they potentially be priced low enough to create enough affordability that the housing choice vouchers could be used for home purchase rather than rental?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a question. I'm going to try to sum it up. No, just to make sure I capture it for those listening in. So the question was, are these projects specifically for rental, or is there a homeownership component? And if there is a homeownership component, would it be priced low enough to access vouchers available for homeownership? So that is something we don't talk about a lot, but they do exist through the Housing Authority, actually vouchers for homeownership. So the initial assessment, and particularly with the downtown properties, was the idea of maximizing what you could do there. And to do that requires multifamily. And in most cases, multifamily, the other funding sources are for rental. So we do anticipate, though not exclusively as part of the evaluation process, that there's going to be a heavy focus on rental construction in the downtown properties. Doesn't mean that we're not looking at homeownership as an option. It just typically with kind of the price value of property and other things, that makes it a little bit more difficult in those key downtown corridors. Within Irwin Hills, they're evaluating kind of all aspects. It could be a combination. That parcel is much larger to look at. It's not as constrained kind of with the urban definition or urbanized boundaries that you're working in. So there is discussion, publicly about, well, what about homeownership units? In each case, they're going to develop a financing scenario, right? They're looking for a developer that can come in and make this project work. So they would, as the projects progress and as the public helps to define what it looks like, then you would know more about the income levels and what might be available.
Can you describe the type of units? Are these I've only heard you mention one bedroom at some point in some context. So are these going to be family size units or for individuals?
Sure. So that's, again, part of the public process is what kind of units are necessary. We do have a recognized need for single person household units. That's a big gap. We have a need for units of all sizes, right? So we anticipate a mixture of, on each site, it depends. Kind of in the first proposals, the downtown sites were largely looking at 1 and 2, possibly a 3-bedroom unit as kind of a maximum. Within the Irwin Hills site, given its location and proximity to schools and other things, family units up to 4 bedrooms were kind of on the table.
Yeah, I'm thinking single parents probably.
Right. So the biggest need is smaller units typically, but we do fund, and I will say this, historically we fund units of all sizes, up to 4-bedroom. Yes, question?
When we're through with your presentations, could you do a quick review of the framework of how a voucher, like I believe that Section 8 has a purchase voucher program. I mean, years ago, I did some work with that.
So the question is about vouchers.
And you can do it later if you
Yeah,
want.
I'll answer it now because I really can't answer it very well. That's really a great question for the Housing Authority. They do project-based vouchers, so that means the voucher's attached to a specific project for rental. They do choice vouchers, which means they move around, like you can identify another landlord and use your voucher at that location.
No, I'm in for the purchase.
They do also have a home ownership voucher program. And I know enough about it to probably be dangerous, so I don't want to speak to it as an expert. But the Housing Authority, they work on that program, and it's part of kind of a long-term plan for some of their residents to move from project-based to choice to home ownership vouchers.
But no, my only other question of the whole day, I promise, is these are just projects, these build outs you've got here. They are for working individuals or families, is the concept. This is not default homeless type housing by any means, is it?
So these projects are affordable. And we are moving away from the county of talking about, there used to be this idea of affordable housing and workforce housing. You probably heard people talk about workforce housing. We are moving away from using the term workforce when we talk about housing, because just because your income is less than 80% doesn't mean you're not part of the workforce. Or just because you're in the median income range doesn't mean you're part of the workforce either, right? So these projects are affordable. Now that may include households incomes at 80% or less, 50% or less, 30% or less. Your status in terms of whether you currently have a home or not isn't part of that factor. So it could mean by the creation of the unit that someone who is homeless now has access to affordable rent and can move into a unit that's created. But it's it's not like a shelter construction, right? So it is available based on your income threshold, not on your current residential status.
I have a question.
Yes.
So that per unit cost, is there a land value in there? Is that certain one and zero?
So that is the assumption of the land being zeroed out. So that cost is removing that. The downtown properties were valued around 2 million each. And there's a presentation that goes into a lot more specifics about kind of this first pass analysis, which is what these represent. Also, a big part of that, what you're seeing on this slide, is the gap. So how much per unit isn't available. So this is the first pass assessment of what other local funds might be necessary to get the project to be delivered.
I have one more question.
Yes.
So you said that these are waiting on more public input, is that correct?
Yes.
And when and how does the public make?
So the question was about the public input process for these and where we are in that. So right now, there aren't any public meetings scheduled for these sites because we're still doing the architectural kind of massing work and all of the geotechnical work to determine what kind of massing we might be able to do. They're anticipated to be in fall. I'm thinking around this time it would be in October. If you go to engage.buncombe.com, you can actually sign up for notices of public input for this project, for many other projects. You can also sign up there to follow the activities of the Affordable Housing Committee. So you'll just be noticed when a meeting's coming up through that portal by registering to receive that information. The next thing that I'll talk about is community-oriented development. I like to bring this up because it's actually not a funding activity that we do, but rather a land use incentive that we provide to encourage the development of affordable and what we now call middle income, what we used to call workforce housing, middle income housing. So it's really a points-based system where you can seek to increase your density. So a lot of projects for viability need to have more units on a lot than what maybe the traditional zoning district would allow. And so here's a way and an example. I won't go into too much detail, but basically you can take a 5-acre lot with a density of 12 units per acre and push that up to 250% of the allowed by right density. So there is a process by which you would seek that. There's a pre-application conference. You actually have to meet a scoring criteria. So there's like a number of things that you're gonna have to do in order to achieve that. And a big way to get points is through dedicated, affordable, or middle income housing units as part of the project. The property does become deed restricted. So there's a deed restriction that's applied to ensure that you provide the units that are affordable. And then for developers that want to pursue it, there are post entitlement and development expectations, including on-site management to make sure that people are income qualified to access the units you've created, and then monitoring. So we would come out and look at your rent rolls, for example, and just make sure that you're making units available to people who qualify and also that you're renting them at rates that they can afford. So this is really for the county. One of the goals is in that middle income or workforce housing space to create units there. That's something we can't fund with general fund dollars. So this is our primary avenue to encourage development of middle income housing. So expanding opportunities. There are a number of things that the county is doing beyond kind of this first swath or areas that we're moving into. There's been a lot of collaboration between county staff and municipal community development staff. So we've been meeting regularly with them, trying to align our application cycles, looking at our applications and seeing if we can ask the same kinds of questions so that it makes it easier for developers to access both sets of funds when projects perhaps in both jurisdictions. So that's been a big emphasis, is aligning with them as partners. Ferry Road, if you've heard about that project, we are involved in that project in its pre-development phases. Currently, there will be or anticipated to be a pretty significant affordable housing component for that project. We're looking at potential external grant funding. So in addition to CDBG and ARPA, we're kind of looking around for what other funds we might be able to pull into the county. So again, not just pushing out general fund dollars, but what funds can we bring in to do affordable housing work? We're also aligning with a lot of other county departments. So ARPA FRF funding, the recovery funds are actually managed by Strategic Partnerships, which is another department within the county. They're doing, for example, they're funding the Compass Point Days Inn conversion project through that. So we're working closely with them on projects that are related to affordable housing. Our sustainability office does weatherization programs to support income qualified households, as well as some solar programming for income qualified households. Home and Community are block grant funds, so that's managed through Aging and Adult Services, but they actually provide repair opportunities for older adults. So that's not an income-based activity, but it does often serve low-income older households. And then just broadly, the Department of Health and Human Services. So they provide emergency rental assistance. They do some other things through state Health and Human Services funding that kind of align with that space. So making sure we're not duplicating effort, we work closely with them as well. And then the last thing, I think I have just a few minutes. Yeah. I was just going to give you guys an overview of our website. It's something that we have recently overhauled completely. And it has a lot of great resources, particularly in the way that we have set it up. Just want to make sure. Probably need to reshare the Zoom. Yeah. You did everything really well, Charles.
Side, right? Is that it?
Great. So this is our main website. So if you go to buncombecounty.org/affordable housing, it will take you here to the main affordable housing site. We have broken up our site based on how you might want to engage with it. So we try to think about who is the audience, right? Everyone, when they're trying to put out any information, who is the audience? So we experience, in terms of like call volume and email requests, a lot of requests about rental needs. So folks looking for affordable rentals. We have requests from people that are trying to find houses that they can afford to purchase. We do have requests about how you might access like homeless shelter spaces or where those are located. We do get a lot of questions about how to access the funding that we use. So those were kind of our four major areas. If you're a homeowner or potential homeowner, if you're a renter or potential renter, if you are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of being homeless, and then if you're a developer or a nonprofit that's looking to access the funds, those are kind of the four main areas. So within each of these, and I'm going to toggle back and forth just briefly, once you click on a resource, it's going to allow you to say, oh, well, you know, I'm interested in rental assistance. I'm having an issue with paying my rent. What is rental assistance? How do I qualify for that? Who's the county currently working with to provide rental assistance? So it's drop-down menus within each one, and it's all associated with rental need. And then within each site, we would have links to the partners that work in rental assistance so that you can access it. So it's really geared towards the type of need that you have. And each one is set up very similarly as you navigate through them. Other big areas are accessing information about the Affordable Housing Committee and its meetings. You can actually go in through the Engage portal and register to receive that information. You can also view prior meetings, look at activities that they've undertaken since they've been created. We do have a dashboard, which is kind of different from the rest of them. But it's speaking to the point earlier of, you know, why are these numbers different? Because we're looking at that narrow window of time from 2022 to 2030 of what we can deliver. And this dashboard, which sometimes takes just a minute to load, takes too long to move past it. But it gives you benchmarks. Like, this is how much we funded. This is how many units have been created. This is where we are in meeting that goal. And you can analyze it through a number of different filters. They're filterable functions. Christian?
things. One, I know that you guys have helped sponsor our affordable housing committee at Loxar for our affordable housing guide that we've had for a few years. Is that a resource that's gonna be on this website?
Yes.
That would be great. Also secondarily, I know that Just Economics is putting together a centralized rental application that is still in the works, but they're trying to get more landlords and folks that have units to use that centralized application, so it helps to streamline things and save money for renter applicants. Is that something that you might be willing to connect with them to have available on your on your website? I know we're gonna have them available on the Loxar affordable housing website we're putting together, but I'm sure that would be a very helpful tool to have available publicly as they get that up and running.
Yeah, so the questions, just I'm gonna try to summarize them. The Loxar guide, will that be something we'll make available? And then if there is ultimately like a consolidated kind of application format Just Economics is working on for a number of landlords across the county, if we would share that kind of resource. So our intention is to engage with everyone who's doing the work to try to get Buncombe County's idea with the new website is to be kind of a central information point for folks. So we want to have as much information as we can get and available to them. So yes, I would imagine if that kind of comes to fruition, that would be something that we would certainly encourage and share through that website. Other organizations like Thrive are working in the rental space and doing a lot of things there. So kind of as products become available, we intend to incorporate them. We, in the initial phases, did not put out the guide from Loxar because it's still in development. We wanted to get the newest one when that hit, right? So we're in the middle of that process with you all right now. But to that point, so again, the dashboard, it's when you can navigate and kind of toggle, and there's a bunch of information there about our goal setting. But I'm going to go back to our main page. There are a couple of resources that are particularly helpful, and we did put them on the main site. So if you wanted to search for housing, nchousingsearch.com is a service that you can use. So we have a link for using that. We also have an affordable housing map. So talking to the point of the Loxar mapping, we use that. We're trying to work in concert with the city and with Loxar in mapping all of the affordability. And there are a lot of different ways to look at that. It is very difficult for us to identify like a single unit that someone's holding and they're renting at an affordable level. These are the large scale projects. But our effort over the last year has been to develop this map, which did not exist previously. There are instructions on how to use it. It's a really good resource. We particularly envision that residents or potential residents can use it, but also if they're engaged with like a case manager or another support service, that they can help you in navigating it. But basically, this map, which the CD staff worked on with our GIS team, gives you the chance to filter. So, you know, if you have a voucher, you can just filter out, I'm going to scroll down here. Right. I'm not used to this mouse. Each time you pick a category, it narrows down the number of properties that are available to you based on your thresholds. Or a question earlier was about, well, I have a voucher, but I need 3 bedrooms. What projects within Buncombe County meet that criteria? And there are instructions on how to do it, but you can then actually pull down a list and print it out. So you have the contact information for the development. I will say a number of them have waiting lists, but at least you can identify and narrow down when you're trying to find those properties, which ones even fit what you need. And then go ahead and reach out and see if you can get on a waiting list, or hopefully even better, actually obtain a unit and be able to move forward with that. That's something we're particularly proud of. We think it'll be really useful for folks seeking rental in our community. That's where we get the volume of our requests. So we do provide information on fair housing on the main website. And at the bottom of every website and referred throughout, because so much of our activity is limited based on your income, is how do you determine if you qualify? And so to the question earlier, it's basically a table. If you're a one-person household, I make less than 80% of AMI if my income is less than this. So you can kind of place yourself into a category, and then that helps you again, like if you're searching for rentals, say, oh, well, I need units that are available to people making less than 30% of area median income, because that's the person that's who I am in this assessment. So for the family of 4, that has increased the 80% threshold from around 65,000 to right at 68,000. So if you're making less than that, you should generally be able to access any of the construction rental units that the county has supported. You would have a path towards home ownership for those affordable home ownership options as well. And then at the bottom, we do provide some narrowing, because there are a number of us that work there. But we like to say, if you're looking for information about renter or homeowner resources or homelessness, contact the staff person. So we do provide a little bit more narrowing, so that you're not just kind of calling a blanket number and having no idea where you're going to land. And that is pretty much everything on the website. I encourage you to take a look at kind of what's there. When you visit, the only other thing I'll mention is a lot of times there will be a banner. So if there's anything like an RFP process or a public input meeting, we might also notify that at the top. So you might see kind of what's the most pressing news item that we have out there. That covers everything. Let's do it.
Any final questions from Matt?
If I can make a quick comment, just on the voucher question, simply vouchers can be used to qualify for a building. It's not a difficult process. It's very simple. It's not a niche thing. It's anything.
And our issue here is mostly just the affordable inventory issue.
Yep.
Which is why it's hard to marry those two things. A lot of folks that have housing choice vouchers, they want to use for home ownership, or going into South Carolina or rural Tennessee to make it happen. So any help we can get with creating affordable inventory in this area that those could be used on would go a long way.
So-
Show now.
Oh, yeah.
There's another one. I know a lot of your processes are kind of geared towards larger developers. Are there plans, and is it possible to, create resources and have them available in less acronymy terms so that folks who maybe want to create an ADU to maintain as affordable housing, or maybe want to build a duplex or two in order to create affordable housing? Are there easy to understand processes to help, some folks who are just trying to create a little bit of extra inventory that can be used as affordable rentals?
Sure. So the county has supported some very small projects over time. I think we've seen a lot more interest for large scale development because the demand for that is so present, right? And so to answer your question about like how do we engage with smaller developers, it's things like this. And these kind of activities are really where we say, hey, we're willing to work with really small projects. For the ARPA funding that we're providing for emergency repair, there's one recipient that's only going to do repairs on 4 houses. So we're not looking for every project to develop 160 units. 4 units makes an impact. And oftentimes, I'm going to say this, you have a pool of funds available and you have a small pot, not left over, but it's like, how do you allocate something? Smaller projects often can win out in a process where you're competing with really large projects because there's not leftover funds, but funds that are harder to allocate just because they're not $2 million or $6 million. So we do encourage that. We're really mindful of the fact that we, in terms of home ownership, our current partner really is the Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity. We are hopeful that won't be our only partner. So, if there are people who are interested in developing affordable housing for home ownership, there are certainly things that you're going to have to do in order to qualify. But we encourage, if you want to build 2 affordable units, make application and seek the funding.
Can you give us an example of a project like that
Of a small project,
yeah,
we haven't done that. We haven't had applications for that in a number of years. Honestly, I would think that the last one was probably in 2011 or 2012, and it wasn't one that I would have worked on directly. But again, it's something that we're trying to encourage folks to do. When we do releases, we release information kind of to big developers that we know are interested. We post it publicly. We're trying to get the word out. So again, platforms like this are a great one for us to encourage developers of all sizes.
So no project's too small.
No, absolutely not.
Couple more questions and then you wrap it up.
Yeah, as far as like when you distribute funds for nonprofits and for developers, is it a percentage of the bill's cost? Or is it this a loan that they didn't pay back? I'm just like private enterprise versus like nonprofit seems really different. So like, how do y'all structure that?
Sure. So our construction funding, so for new units for homeownership or for rental, and whether it's conversion or new construction, they are loans. The way we disperse the funds, it's reimbursement based. So you actually incur the expense for whatever part of construction that we are, approving you to get the funding for. We typically hold retainage at this point, kind of until the end of the project, so you can access up to 90% of the cost. Typically, because we are a very low interest lender compared to the market, they pull our funds down really early, and then they hold them, and then they get the retainage at the end, and that's the point when interest actually hits. So it's a really, beneficial type of financing for those projects, but they are loans, and there is an expectation of repayment. So we want to reinvest those funds into the community. For nonprofits, we are not exclusively reimbursement based, but we don't have any that we currently issue funding to in advance. So you perform the work, we reimburse you for the work that you prove that you've completed. And that's if they are receiving a granted award and not a construction. If you're a nonprofit with construction funding, it's a loan. It's the same thing as you receive as a for-profit developer.
What about like emergency repair projects?
So those are reimbursement based as well. So you would perform the work, produce the records of the expense, and then it's reimbursed if they are, we have a process where we're making sure that those are income qualified households, but yes, they're reimbursement based grants.
Are you limited how much of the funding you can give per year?
So the question is about how much funding can we provide per year? The application process on its own gives you an idea of what the need is or how the county might respond. The committee makes a recommendation for what they'd like to fund. That recommendation also translates to how much general fund dollars they would need to do it. They have been pretty consistent in saying we want to hold the current level of general fund investment and been able to support most of the projects that they've requested. But part of their process, when they get the applications in, is saying, well, instead of $2.3 million, we want to fund $3 million worth of activities. So we need $3 million. And then the board ultimately decides if they want to increase the general fund transfer. So every year it's a decision, do we want to continue with 2.3 million? Do we want to increase that? Potentially, do you need to reduce it? So it is a process. You're not guaranteed at the application cycle that there's any funds available, honestly.
Right.
But that's been the standard kind of level.
And will the 3 county sites be open for application in February if they go through comment period and everything's?
So the question is about the 3 sites that are in the feasibility study and if those would be part of the application process. So they're a completely separate process.
Okay.
And the way that would work is, obviously we're going to try to achieve development agreement. It will likely suggest an amount of gap funding that might be needed. And through the development agreement, the county may pre-commit funds. So there's a number of avenues, but those projects won't come through the Affordable Housing Services Program in the traditional sense. Since the county owns the property, it's a little bit different.
A huge round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.